Welcome to the GI Nutrition Show. I'm Amy McCrea, registered dietitian and CEO of Grounded Root Nutrition. Today's topic is, what is the low FODMAP diet and will it help with SIBO? So the low FODMAP diet was developed by Monash University in Australia. And what they did is they found that certain foods caused a lot of GI upset, from bloating to indigestion, constipation, diarrhea, the whole gamut. And they looked at the components within those foods, and they were able to break them into 6 different categories. And the categories that they divide foods into are fructans, GOS, sorbitol, mannitol, fructose in excess of glucose. So that means they first look at the amount of glucose in a food, and if the fructose content is higher than the glucose level, then it goes in that category, and then lactose. So they broke the foods into these categories and they created what they called a diet, a low FODMAP diet, to help patients that were sensitive to these foods or had GI distress and they didn't know where it came from, find a way to get relief. And then they developed a certification program for health professionals such as myself to complete. And so we are low FODMAP trained. It's fantastic. I love it. But the low FODMAP diet can be really, really complicated. It's really difficult to implement singularly and on your own when you don't have the help of a healthcare professional. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into what foods fall into each of these 6 categories, so you first can understand what exactly is a low FODMAP diet. It is pretty restrictive in terms of the amount of foods that you end up taking out that you probably consume on an everyday basis. So if we just start with meats in general are going to be very low FODMAP. What you have to watch out for are the marinades that they might be in. And so that's where we'll put more of the focus when it comes to our proteins in our meat, is how do you cook it? What are you putting it in? Because that's where all the offending components come in. So when it comes to fruits are generally in excess of fructose category, as well as the sorbitol category. Dried fruits are super concentrated, and so they'll often be a lot higher than their fresh components. So you might see that we want to take those out. Some high FODMAP fruits include apples, pears, mangoes, stone fruits, so like peaches, plums, nectarines, and watermelon. Very, very high. On the flip side, the ones that are low include oranges, bananas, grapes, kiwis, strawberries, cantaloupe, rhubarb, raspberries, pineapple. And this is where I'm going to put a little plug in. If you're somebody that deals with headaches, low FODMAP might not be the answer for you, because sometimes what we find for headaches is it might be a totally different chemical component, whether it be solanine or salicylic acid, and that's really the driver behind your headaches. And a low FODMAP diet includes a lot of these foods. So if you're somebody that suffers from headaches, I highly recommend that you seek someone such as myself to help you be a little bit more of a detective to find out what's going on. All right, so we've talked about fruits. What about vegetables? Vegetables are typically high in either mannitol or fructans. They might include garlics, onions, leeks, artichokes, asparagus, snow peas, mushrooms, cauliflower. Those are really, really high. So what do we go to for low FODMAP? A green pepper, a zucchini, potatoes, green beans, because they are not really in that lentil bean category. They are identified as a green bean, but I would even take the bean component out of that. We've got eggplant as low FODMAP, carrots, rhubarb, raspberries, pineapple. Now, those are actually in the vegetable category, although we typically think of them as fruits. And then we come to breads and cereals. And this is very interesting. And this is, down the road on a future podcast, I'll be talking a little bit more about non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But this is when we also turn to the low FODMAP diet to do a little bit of detective work, because it could be that they're really sensitive to fructans and GOS, because those are in gluten products. So that wheat, rye, and barley breads, biscuits, and snack products are going to have these. And so we might have to differentiate between, is it 100% gluten, or do we have to do something like a spelt sourdough bread and oat sourdough bread, oats, quinoa flakes? What is it exactly that's going on when we're dealing with that non-celiac gluten sensitivity? But the breads contain fructans and GOS, which can be sensitive. Pulses, or beans is how we typically refer to them in the US. They are high in GOS. Now, beans we can lower that GOS content by soaking them in water or boiling them. So I often will advise patients that are sensitive to beans when they go to put them back in their diet, or they want to keep them in their diet because they're a great source of folate. I love for patients to consume beans and lentils, to go ahead and pre-boil them. Rinse them out of the can, boil them in some water, rinse them again, and then put them in the dish. It is a great way to cut down on those GOSs and help them, because they're water soluble, so it helps break them down. We've got nuts and seeds, and most seeds are low FODMAP, but there are some nuts that are high in GOS and fructans. So we just kind of want to be cautious with that. Cashews and pistachios are big offenders, but you'd be fine with like a macadamia nut, a peanut, or a pine nut. And then when it comes to dairy, we all know about lactose intolerance. So lactose is the high FODMAP that is in dairy products. And so if you're really sensitive to dairy products, it could be that you maybe don't have enough of the lactase enzyme to break down the lactose. Sugars and sweeteners we have to be careful with. We're going to end up seeing fructose and then sugar polyols. So the thing like your erythritol, your xylitol, those type of things. And then sauces we just kind of have to watch out for. Most of the time, garlic and onion is what we'll find in those. And as we talked before, garlic and onions are in that mannitol and fructan. It's really the fructan category for them. So we have to be really careful. So now you know a little bit more about what exactly a low FODMAP diet is and the foods that you might be able to consume when you're on it. So the question comes back to, when would you actually use a low FODMAP diet? And that is a really, really good question. So patients that have a long-standing list of GI issues could potentially be candidates for it, as well as patients that can really easily identify their trigger foods. So if they come to me and they say, Amy, garlic blows me up like a blimp, or it sets off my GI symptoms, then I'm going to go to this list and say, okay, let's look at these fructans and see where you're sensitive and figure out what your tolerance level is, or do we need to get rid of it altogether? There are also some awesome products on the market that help patients digest these. They actually add some additional enzymes to help break down these components of the food. They're called FODzymes. There's also FODMAP. So they're really awesome. I love them. Many of my patients use them. But I will say in general, I do not ever put patients on a full low FODMAP diet. And the reason is going to be very similar to why I also didn't recommend the Candida diet. It's incredibly strict and really difficult to follow. And I really worry about my patients' mental health and the stress that it causes, which can lead to disordered eating patterns. But as we've talked, when the level of stress goes up exponentially, it also creates this challenge for the patients, and it really has a negative effect on our digestive tract and what we might be trying to achieve. So I'm incredibly cautious when it comes to using a low FODMAP diet. I tend to have a preference to be more selective elimination of offending FODMAPs rather than an all-inclusive low FODMAP diet. The other concern with a low FODMAP diet is if studies have shown that if you follow this diet really for more than 4 weeks in the strict component, you are going to begin having significant changes in your gut microbiome. And we've talked about this before. If we have changes in our gut microbiome, we're going to then allow the opportunity for pathogens to develop. Okay, so let's say you've been diagnosed with SIBO and you go to the internet. One of the first things that you're probably going to read is this SIBO diet. And the SIBO diet is a low FODMAP diet. Now, if we know anything about SIBO, it's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And there's also intestinal methanogen overgrowth, or IMO. SIBO used to be thought of as just methane dominant or hydrogen dominant. There's also hydrogen sulfide components, so there's 3 different types. But they've recently begun small intestine bacterial overgrowth is more hydrogen, and IMO, this methane, is really large intestine. So we've begun to differentiate in the field. It's a newer differentiation. But what it is an overgrowth of bacteria in your gut. And these bacteria do feed on food sources. But do you really need a low FODMAP diet? Because what their science may or may not support is that it is the FODMAPs that the SIBO bacteria want to feed on. And this is where I'm going to step in and kind of go to the pathway that I've talked about before. If we have a lack of diversity of foods, it's going to make changes in our gut microbiome, which is going to allow pathogenic bacteria or perhaps opportunistic bacteria to grow and wreak havoc in our gut. So is the solution then to further restrict your diet? Or is the solution really to broaden your diet and really make sure we get diversity in foods so that we can rebuild your gut microbiome? The latter of the two is my preference. So what are some of the causes of SIBO for how you might have gotten here in the first place? Food poisoning can be one, antibiotic use, gut illness, GI conditions such as celiac, Crohn's, diverticulitis, and intestinal adhesions, a poor diet, not surprised there, right? And poor gut motility, especially constipation. So when our bowels don't move and our food and everything just sits there, it does allow for changes in that microbiome. So we really do need to put a good bit of effort into making sure that we have exactly what we need. We need to make sure that we are putting really good quality foods into our body and we're taking care of ourselves so that we don't prevent these things from happening to begin with. So in a nutshell, I do not recommend a low FODMAP diet for patients that are diagnosed with SIBO. It can be complementary if you do specific groups because a patient knows they're really, really sensitive. But generally speaking, I want my patients to begin diversifying their diet because that is what we need to offset all of these bacteria that have grown. So when you take a whole food approach, you start seeing changes. And when you add more whole foods, you reduce those processed foods and the sweet foods, which is what the SIBO bacteria are feeding on to begin with. So of course, you want to be mindful of portion sizes and trying to stay within recommended guidelines and try to pair any sweets or fruits with meals. That is one of my number one recommendations to patients. SIBO does commonly reoccur if you don't make diet and lifestyle changes. So again, if we aren't making these changes and we're just doing a temporary low FODMAP diet, then we're going right back to eating how we did before, chances are you're going to be in this boat again and listening to this podcast again. So seek help from a qualified professional such as myself to guide you in complete healing if you are dealing with SIBO or you suspect you have low FOD or high FODMAP sensitivities. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Please visit my website, groundedrootnutrition.com, to learn more about how I can become a partner in your health journey, or contact me directly at hello@groundedrootnutrition.com. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again soon.